Hi everybody, welcome back to Beth and AM. I'm Ellie Marie, and today we actually have two parts. This is the first one, and we're going to talk about genre. Okay, so disclaimer. This video is two parts. It was originally supposed to be one, but in the interest of keeping the video short, I decided to split it into two parts. This first part is going to touch on genre, while the second part will touch on premise. So if you are watching this one for the first time and haven't seen premise yet, awesome, go ahead and finish this video and then move on to premise, and you will have everything for this particular day's worth of vlog posts. If you've already watched premise and are getting to this one, welcome, and I hope you enjoy it as much as you enjoyed the other one. Alright, so hopefully most people already know what genre is, but just for the sake of you, those who don't, genre is the topic or the general theme of your story, and there are categories that are broken down that help define your work's genre or the book that you're reading's genre, and it helps people understand a little bit more about your book before they even pick it up and read like a synopsis or a premise. So genres are important when you are submitting to literary agents, when you're submitting to publishers, and when you are submitting to readers, people who are interested in purchasing and reading your work, or when you are explaining your work to someone who has inquired about it. And that's kind of why genre and premise go hand in hand. And if you skip over to our premise video, you'll find out why that is important as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the fiction genre topics that are more popular and more well known. I have my handy dandy list here because, as you can see, there's a lot of them. And even this list isn't comprehensive. It only covers a lot of the common ones. It doesn't really cover a lot of the like sub genres that are really niche genres that some people cater to. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at the ones that I feel like I don't need to define because they are already well known. You have classic, and these are going to be classic works that are generally accepted into classic literature canon. Think of the ones that you study in high school and in college in literature classes and whatnot. Ones that, regardless of how long they've been around or what generation they were written in or what country they were written in, they are considered wonderful literature and good examples of their genre. So you have classic fiction. You have comics or graphic novels, crime and detectives, fantasy, historical fiction, horror. I'm passing the ones that I don't feel like are easy to define. Mystery, romance, picture book, science fiction, so sci-fi, short stories, suspense and thriller, and western. So those are all big genre, wide genre topics that a lot of people would recognize from either picking out a book at the library or from picking a movie on Netflix. A lot of those genres you can find on Netflix. Romance is a big one on Netflix for us in our queue because I watch a lot of romance. Figure. Action, adventure, and sci-fi and fantasy are ones that you can find on our Netflix queue as well because my husband and I both enjoy those. If you go to a library and you're looking for a book, they have those fantasy, action, adventure, sci-fi sections that you can kind of go to help you find books that cater to your interests. So that's a list of the big well-known genres. So let's take a look at some of the less well-known genres, but ones that are still popular among the fiction subset. All right, so we have a fable. And the reason I have the ones like fable, fairy tale, and mythology and mythopoeia in here is because I really wanted to be able to define those for you, because a lot of people use these interchangeably and in reality they're really not. So a fable is going to be a legendary or supernatural tale demonstrating a useful truth. So those stories that you were kind of told as a kid that were supposed to teach you something, like Hansel and Gretel, that has like a don't wander off into the forest and trust anybody you see. Hansel and Gretel has other lessons to be learned, like stepmothers aren't wonderful. For some reason, stepmothers were always not good in those stories. Stepmothers are wonderful people. But a fable is a legendary or supernatural tale demonstrating a useful truth. So if you're wanting to write a fable, or if you find that that fits your story, maybe fable is one of your story's subgenres. Fairy tale is a story about fairies or other magical creatures. So not everything that people like to label as fairy tales really fits that genre. So unless your story really has elements of fairies or mythical creatures of those sorts, fantasy creatures, magical creatures, it really probably shouldn't have that label. Fairy tale is also considered a subgenre, and I will get into the idea of primary genre and subgenre after we look at our genre topics. The next one is folklore, and this one is going to be songs, stories, myths, and proverbs of a group of people that have been passed down by mouth. Now, they could be written down now, but their primary way of being passed down previously was by mouth, and that's what folklore is. That's where you get things like Mothman. Mothman started as a folklore. It was primary set to that small town that it all happened in, and it really started as a word of mouth. Everybody was like, hey, have you seen Mothman? Hey, have you seen, and so that's kind of an understanding of folklore. And then we have humor, which is going to be a fiction that's full of fun, fancy, excitement, and is meant to invoke laughter. This is, again, a subgenre. A lot of times you can find humor as a genre within other major genres. So again, we will get to that in a moment. Legend. This is a story, sometimes of a national or folk hero, that has basis in fact, but also includes imaginative material. So that's part of what makes a legend important, is they have a basis in fact. So chances are that person actually existed. So here in America, we have Davy Crockett. Davy Crockett is one of our big legends. He was a real person. He did real things, but a lot of them are exaggerated or more extreme in the stories that we tell than what they probably were in real life. Not all of them, because he was a pretty insane guy in a good way. Magical realism. This is a story where magical or unreal elements play a natural part in an otherwise realistic environment. So Bright, the movie Bright on Netflix, that would be a good example of that, where you have a very modern, normal setting aside from some magical or unreal elements. Metafiction. This is going to be works that refer to themselves within themselves, bringing attention to the fact that the work is a piece of art and that it is meant to just bring attention to itself. It's breaking the fourth wall is another way to kind of refer to this, metafiction. Mythology. Now, the reason I didn't list mythology as one of the well-known genres is because I want to make sure you understand the definition of mythology. Mythology is legend or traditional narrative, often based in part on historical events, that reveals human behavior and natural phenomena by its symbolism, often pertaining to the actions of the gods. So one of the big things to understand about mythology and to understand the definition of mythology is that mythology explains natural events or things that have happened. And so ancient Greeks, for example, would often have stories about their deities, such as Apollo, to explain why natural events happened. Apollo and his chariot were one of the reasons they had for why the sun moves across the sky. So that's one of the big things with mythology. So if you are classifying your work as mythology, you need to make sure that it has that in there somewhere. And really, it needs to be based on something that really existed. Mythology is kind of a difficult one to decide to write in. That's why there's Mythiopia, which is a genre in which characters from mythology, actual existing mythology, are reimagined into a created realm. And so you could take elements from Roman, Greek mythology, Norse mythology, and reimagine them in something new, and that would be Mythiopia, not just mythology. And so that allows authors a genre to work within that tells people this has mythological elements in it, but it is not purely a retelling of mythology tales. Realistic fiction, and that's just fiction that is very realistic. And a tall tale. This is our last one to define. A tall tale is a humorous story with blatant exaggerations, such as swaggering heroes who do the impossible with nonchalance. My biggest example for this is Paul Bunyan and his Big Blue Ox. Paul Bunyan is a common story that children hear about here in America. We all know that he's not real. We all know that there's not a giant man who wandered around Western America with his gigantic blue ox. But it's a tall tale. It's something that we like to tell, we like to talk about. It could also be considered a fable because it does also have lessons within his stories that he supposedly went through. So that is our long list of genres. Some of them defined, some of them not defined. So now real quick, because NaNoWriMo does not limit itself to fiction only, we are going to touch on the genres that define nonfiction. You have biography, including autobiographies. You have essays, owner manuals, journalism, lab reports, memoirs, narrative nonfiction. This one is difficult for people to separate from fiction, but there is such a thing as narrative nonfiction. Reference book, self-help book, a speech, and textbooks. So those are all big examples of nonfiction genres. Sorry, I don't know if my camera's gonna be able to focus on that or not. It kind of has issues sometimes with focusing. And you are welcome to write these for NaNoWriMo. They are very clear on the NaNoWriMo site that it does not have to be fiction in order to count for your 50,000 word count. So with all of these in mind, let's go ahead and talk really quick and really briefly about the idea of major genre and subgenre. So when you are working on a piece, you will often find that it fits within more than one genre. And that's normal and that's perfectly acceptable. And that's why we're going to look at genre and subgenre. So your work's primary genre is going to be that major genre that is easy to understand and that everybody can define. So one that I listed without defining that fits your story. So mine, for my work for this NaNoWriMo, is a suspense or thriller. That's one that generally everybody knows what suspense or thriller means. They know what that means. I don't need to define it, and it fits the overall feel of my work. Now there are other subgenres that fit within that, like horror is oftentimes a subgenre. It can be a primary genre, but oftentimes horror is a subgenre, unless that is what you write. Unless you are working within the horror niche, and horror is a niche, believe me, not everybody wants to read horror. So horror would be one of my subgenres that I have chosen. And I'm not sure that there's really too many others. That mystery could be one of my subgenres, even though it is a primary genre used usually. Crime or detective is another one that could be considered a subgenre, although it really doesn't have huge detective elements in it, and I don't want to mislead readers by using that. There are genres and subgenres that pair together very nicely and that are classic pairings for genres, such as you have a lot of historical fiction or realistic fiction that gets melded with romance as its primary genre. And so you could get, one of my favorite books is The Lady and the Poet, and it's about John Donne. And so that is historical fiction. Even though it's about a real character, it is completely reimagined about what his in life with his wife would have been like. But it's historical fiction, but its primary one I would consider to be romance. And so you have romance and then you have historical fiction. You could flop those and have it historical fiction and then romance. A lot of that oftentimes is up to the author, the agent, and the publisher and what they feel like will market the book the best. But those kind of pair together naturally. You also have action and adventure pair really well with fantasy or with sci-fi. You also have mythopoeia pairs really well with fantasy. So you have these natural genres that like to pair together. For nonfiction, you could have in a biography, you could have elements of a speech or elements of a owner's manual. It just depends on what your biography is about. So don't be afraid when you start working on your work and you realize, oh, it doesn't fit with just one genre. It can fit with multiple genres. A primary genre is what you're going to use to really tell those looking at your work, this is primarily what is in this. It is primarily action. It is primarily romance. It is primarily humor. And then you have your subgenres that expand upon that and give your readers, your literary agents, your publishers a better understanding of what is under that primary genre, what is left in there. So make sure you have a primary genre in mind while you are writing. It will help lead your work. And then don't be afraid to pick some subgenres and to say, I'd like to kind of try to wiggle these in. Or if you find that you finished your work and it fits other subgenres that you didn't realize it did, you can list those. So that's a rundown of genre, and I hope that you learned something and that it was helpful. And I'd like to take this moment to ask you to subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to ring that little bell so that you get notifications when I update, which there will be a second video today, so be prepared for that. And as always, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you. Bye.